Hey guys, how's it going? So I thought what would be pretty interesting for my little video presentation, today being August 14th, would actually be a day or two after East German soldiers started laying down more than 30 miles of barbed wire right down through Berlin. So what I'm going to talk about is kind of like the Berlin Wall, how it got to that point, and the final collapse. On August 12th, 1961, East German soldiers again started laying down and blazing a trail for more than 30 miles of barbed wire, essentially dividing Berlin into two sections formally. This action was a surprise to the West, and threats of embargoes started happening. But what this turned into was a lip service. Like, they weren't really going to do much. And the East Germans started seeing this. So what happened is it became more of like a saber rattling, and it emboldened the East. And then they started shutting down more and more checkpoints, and then finally really started to dial in this wall. A few days later, East Germany began replacing the barbed wire with actually columns and concrete barricades to start the Berlin Wall off. But here's the deal. The reason they were starting to do this was to protect the East Germans from the super bougie, decadent capitalists of the West. So we had this communist capitalism, both societies battling at each other. And during the rest of the 1961, the Berlin Wall continued to grow, and it eventually consisted of a series of concrete walls that stood about 15 feet tall. And this would go through, as you see in just here in a couple minutes, a series of generations of walls. All right. So, but let's go back and talk about how this started, in how this wall and how this idea of two Germanys started. So there's a couple important dates in the establishment of the East and West Germany. On May 1945, the Soviet army stormed into Berlin, smashing everybody, and essentially ending the war, World War II in Europe. So it kind of gave the Soviets like a sense of accomplishment and entitlement to that area. And then after this, Germany was divided into 4 territories, okay? So what this was is that at the end of World War II, we have this, major Axis power, Germany, that was essentially the cause of the whole war in Europe. And we have to figure out how to rebuild this society. And you had 4 major players establishing control in that region. You had the United States, of course. You had Britain. You had the French. And you had the Soviet Union. They divided up into 4 quadrants, all right? So this division was only supposed to be temporary. Again, see how we can rebuild Germany, and what we have to do to make this country whole again, and also how to establish better control. But in 1946, Germany was formally divided between the Allied forces, okay? This was a formal agreement. And then in the 50s, this brought this establishment of the communist country in the East, okay? So what started to happen is there's like this evolution of isolation during the 1950s. In 1952, East Germany closed its borders to the West, all right? So you had Germany controlled by the Soviet Union, and then you had the West, again, with Britain, France, and America. And what you could see is that post-World War II, East Germany was getting just ransacked. All the anything you could find to pull out, whether it be goods, whether it be materials, it was just getting hammered by the Soviet Union as kind of like a reparation of sort. And in the West, you had the United States, Britain, and France pouring in money, trying to establish this as a country. And as you can see, there's going to be this stark division between the two. So on December 11th, 1957, East Germany could no longer leave the country and go to the West Germany. The border closed down, all right? So, but you still had this permission. They could still travel in East and West Berlin because that was like the central hub. So there's permission given. It was a pain in the butt. You had to go back and forth, but literally you could see communism and you could see capitalism going back and forth just in Berlin. And now we arrive so during the 50s, that tide of isolation just kept on rolling, and it got more divided, and you see this big difference between East and West. And now we arrive at August 13th, 1961, when the border in Berlin, not the country, in Berlin was officially closed. They shut it down. Boom. They started running that barbed wire. You could see what was starting to happen. All right. So throughout this wall, this division line now runs, between East and West, and now we have the official wall in Berlin. All right. In 1965, like I mentioned in the very beginning, the third generation of the wall was built. All right. So they kept on evolving this barrier, which was amazing. You had some escapes. You had some attempts. There's a great, I wish I could edit in, not very good at editing, but I wish I could edit in this photo of Konrad Schumann. And it was the first escape. As he's laying down the barbed wire, he goes, "I'm out of here," and right over and escapes to West Germany. But during this time, between 1961 and 1989, 5,000 people estimated to escape from East to West. And this, man, they did all sorts of crazy stuff. Guy stole a tank, rammed it through the wall. Guy derailed a train. You had zip lines, you had tunneling systems, just any way you could see to get from this communist stronghold into this freedom-loving, well, I shouldn't say freedom-loving, but more free society of West Germany. And now, just very briefly, I know I'm rambling here a little bit. We're about 8 minutes in. I wanted to talk about when I was a kid. I'm 42. When I was a kid, we had this family friend come from Germany. I was born in Heidelberg, Germany. And his name was Lutz, and he came prior to, I was like 11 years old. So this was like 11, 12. So this was like right after the fall of the Berlin Wall in 1989, which I'll touch on in just a second. But he burned this image into my head. This image of the Wizard of Oz, okay? So in the Wizard of Oz, it starts out as black and white, and then when Dorothy gets caught up in the tornado and all the craziness happens, and she's in the land of Oz, what happens? Boom, Technicolor. Like, it's a big surprise. Everything turns beautiful and bright. And he gave that same exact analogy when he was talking about just looking from east to west or west to east. It went from like this, east was just this dark, everybody's just looking down and sad and just bleh, to the west, where, man, we're partying, we're having fun, all right? It's the 80s, man, we're getting after it, right? So just keep that image in your mind. Now, just to wrap this whole thing up, in 1989, East Germany's communist regime was overwhelmed. Again, we saw in the readings that we had with the revolutions of the 1989, with the decolonization, the trying to gain back people's independence from countries, they were just overwhelmed. And on November 9th, 1989, East Germany announced that they're going to start easing travel restrictions to the West. And then, boom, just like that, everybody's heading for that wall, and they're demanding access. They want to get across. We're just done. All right. So faced with these giant demonstrations, East German border guards just went like this. You know what? We're done. Open the doors. We're hammering. We're going across. So, man, I can remember this as a kid. Just people bouncing on the walls, climbing the walls, just having a giant party. And I think I was trying to dig it up earlier down in my stuff, but I have actually a little piece of the Berlin Wall that Lutz gave me, which was pretty cool. It's somewhere, but I just haven't found it yet. And I thought it'd be kind of cool for this presentation, but I digress. So the very next day, man, November 10th, they started dismantling this wall. And starting to unify the country. And officially in 1990, East and West was officially unified into one country. It's a fascinating story. I could talk on this. There is a couple rad sources that I'll put in the little link below. Check them out. And I think what is the most, actually I should say the best way to end this is the most perfectly 80s thing ever. Again, I'm 42, childhood of the 80s and 90s. You cannot get any better than the Hoff, David Hasselhoff, singing "Looking for Freedom" from 1989. This happened during the taking down of the wall. So I'll end on this, and we'll fade out on this song. So I'm sure, well, I hope that you guys can see this before YouTube breaks it down. But man, here we go. All right, it's been a pleasure, fun little assignment, and I look forward to seeing what you guys have to offer. See ya.